Donald Trump's on the warpath in Afghanistan, but it's Pakistan he lashes out at, saying it harbors what he calls terrorists. He warns Afghanistan's neighbor it must stop. But will the US president succeed in ending America's longest war where others have failed? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. US President Donald Trump is sending more troops to fight the Taliban in Afghanistan. No longer nation building. America will fight to win, he says. Announcing his new strategy, he singled out Pakistan, saying it must stop providing safe havens for those he calls terrorists. And he wants India to help the Afghan economy grow, which will not please Pakistan. But Afghanistan's chief executive, Abdullah, is urging the two countries to get on board with Trump.
We expect from neighboring country and our other partners to consider this new policy as an opportunity. We had like a mutual respect between us and our partners, and we announce our commitment and our preparedness to talk with anybody who is prepared to talk with us.
The Taliban responded to Trump's new plan by promising more violence. In a statement, it said, the Afghan Mujahid nation will never tire of fighting for its independence and bringing an Islamic regime here. If Americans do not withdraw their forces from our soil in the 21st century, Afghanistan will turn into the graveyard for American imperialism. US President Donald Trump endorsed a new type of American foreign policy that he claimed would protect American interests. Although he didn't reveal much information about American boots on the ground, he made it very clear he would put America first. Our Pentagon correspondent Patty Culhane reports.
As a citizen, Donald Trump said it was time to get out of Afghanistan. And he says as president, his first instinct was to leave. But he's now convinced more troops are needed to end America's longest war.
We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. Conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timetables, will guide our strategy.
He wouldn't say, but reports are the U.S. will send 4,000 additional U.S. troops. Along with more troops from NATO countries, the president argued the commitment is necessary in order to keep armed groups from finding a base in Afghanistan again. This will bring the total number of U.S. troops to just over 12,000, a far cry from the 100,000 that Barack Obama sent in hopes of forcing the Taliban to negotiate. That didn't work, but military experts argue now this much smaller number still might.
Well, I don't think that the commanders on the ground nor the national security officials would have recommended it unless they felt that this had a chance to significantly change the situation on the ground.
President Trump also had some tough words for Pakistan, who he says need to do more to get the Taliban to peace talks.
We have been paying Pakistan billions and billions of dollars. At the same time, they are housing the very terrorists that we are fighting. But that will have to change.
Candidate Trump promised America first, and to some, this might seem like he's going back on that pledge. But with such a small number of troops and really a war that is very rarely talked about in the American media, it is unlikely that he'll get much pushback from the people who made him President of the United States. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's bring in our panel. We welcome from Kabul, Shafiq Hamdam, former NATO advisor. In Islamabad, Ayaz Wazir, former Pakistan ambassador to Afghanistan. And Hardin Lang, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to you all. Let me start by asking Mr. Hardin Lang this. Are we talking about a new Afghanistan policy, or this is just a rehash of older approaches?
Well, it feels very much like things that we have seen before in the past, albeit with a little bit less detail. Again, at the end of the Obama administration, we saw President Obama make a couple of decisions about limiting the level of withdrawals that he had originally wanted to see to keep a certain number of people, American troops, in the fight on the ground, trained, assisted in combat counterterrorism missions. What we're now seeing is the president committing to do more on the military front, but bizarrely not telling us how many more troops he intends to keep in the fight. If his commanders if we're to go by the number his commanders has asked for, we're looking at probably 4,000 or so additional troops going in. But it's hard to see how that's going to make a major strategic shift in the battlefield. It may be sufficient to help sort of push back against a rising Taliban, but it's not clear how this is going to fundamentally change the strategic arc of the conflict.
Mr. Hamdan, we've seen some positive reactions coming from Afghanistan, where you are. What makes people believe that Trump can achieve what eluded Bush and Obama?
What is difference in this new strategy is that it has a regional approach, which includes, besides Afghanistan and Pakistan, India, and as well as giving further authorization to the troops and commander to make decisions on the ground. And meanwhile, it is also added to the strategy to put further pressure on Pakistan to not only fight terrorism and insurgents in Pakistan, but to close and shut the safe havens of terrorists and insurgent groups who are operating from Pakistan inside Afghanistan, targeting Afghan national security forces, Afghan civilians, and the US coalition forces. And besides that, it's also directing Afghan government condition-based support to work closely and seriously on government reform. So these are the differences that Afghan people were expecting in this policy, as well as the deadline. And before, every strategy have had an exit ticket attached, but this strategy does not have any end date or any exit ticket for the troops who are operating in Afghanistan, which encounters clearly the message of Taliban, which they were using as they described it, you have the watch, but we have the time.
I see your
now
point.
the theme is reversed, and it's more that we have the time.
Mr. Wazir, in Islamabad, you've heard the Pakistan bashing by President Donald Trump. Do you think this is something that could be conducive to any change of behavior of the Pakistani government?
Well, I would feel there is no much difference in putting pressure on Pakistan, because this the US has always been saying since 9/11. I don't forget, or I should say we all remember what Mrs. Clinton has said right over here in Islamabad when she came on a visit, demanding to do more of Pakistan. That the US says and said when it was in full might in Afghanistan with the NATO forces over there also. But I do not think this is the solution of the problem. Shifting the responsibility of itself to others is not a solution. If Pakistan is providing safe havens, then what about the people sitting in Afghanistan are taking Pakistan from there? If safe havens are here, safe havens are over there also. Both countries need to look into this problem and address it peacefully. By force, I'm afraid, no one, when the American with all its might and the NATO forces couldn't do it before, I don't think it can be done now when almost half of the Afghan territory is either under the Taliban influence or seriously threatened. So let's not accuse each other. I know what President Trump said. I was carefully attending to his address this morning. He did take a serious note of that, but that, as I said, is not the first time that Pakistan is threatened.
We will talk more details about the basic tenets of this whole new approach to Afghanistan. Let me go to Mr. Lang. Mr. Lang, isn't there any concern that the Americans might fall into the old trap, which is basically they say we are here for a short period, they send troops, then they have to commit more troops on the ground, and then to maintain success on the ground, they have to be involved in nation building, and then it takes forever, and then when the anti-war sentiment goes high, they pull out?
Well, I mean, I think we're already in the middle of that trap in the sense that we've been there for 16 years in significant troop levels and spending, trillions of dollars. We've had up to 100,000 troops on the ground. And now what we have is President Trump saying, in essence, we're going to plus up, likely in a minor way, the level of military commitment. But this time we're not going to put a time-bound condition on it. We're going to base it on conditions on the ground. But then he didn't even bother to tell the American people what those conditions are. And I think that's a very serious cause for concern. If you're going to put additional troops on the ground, you need to explain to Americans how that additional number, you need to tell them how many it's going to be, and you need to tell them why that number is going to make a difference in the arc of the conflict, and under what conditions you're going to bring them back. And so basically, President Trump's speech on this raised many more questions than it answered.
Mr. Hamdan, you seemed very confident at the beginning of your intervention, but then when the Americans, along with the international forces operating in Afghanistan few years ago, were more than 100,000 soldiers, they failed to defeat Taliban. What makes you convinced this time that with less than that number, they can make some change on the ground?
Actually, there are three reasons. First, I would like to reiterate that when there were more troops in Afghanistan, the situation was different. It was a lot better than what it is today. And actually, the three things that I'm confident about is, first, pressuring Pakistan government, and second is the authorizing the troops to make a decision on the ground. And third, the Afghan National Security Forces are capable enough right now to have the support and assistance of the U.S. forces to tackle the challenges, which is of course serious and a lot worse than what it was in 2014. Therefore, we have requested the United States to continue its support. And just to add into that, I think the strategy has some guarantee as well, as Mr. President said, that U.S. will use all available tools, including diplomatic, economic, and military means to enforce this strategy. So this will guarantee the implementation of the strategy. And as it's already clear to many that President Trump is not joking when it comes to about his policies and strategies, he really sticking to that, and he will ensure that's applied.
Mr. Wazir, the American president was very critical of Pakistan, praising India, asking the Indians to be involved in helping the Afghan economy. Aren't you concerned that this could further strain ties between the two countries, the two arch rivals, that could have a bad impact on the future of Afghanistan?
Well, very rightly said. This certainly raises antennas here in Islamabad, because as you said, he accused Pakistan, while in fact before that he did admire the sacrifices that Pakistan made in fighting this war. But then immediately he turned around and he accused Pakistan of safe havens, and then immediately demanded that it should take action. But you rightly, as I said, you rightly said that inviting India to invest more in Afghanistan, that the Indians are already doing, on which nobody has any objection. But the Indians' presence, which they use for being present in Afghanistan against Pakistan, that is of serious concern. And I think President Trump said that India should help us in fighting this menace. If the Indians are willing to put their foot on the ground in Afghanistan, they are most welcome. If they think they can fight the war in Afghanistan along with the American to eliminate, then they would be, I think, inviting trouble. But let's not forget, one thing. Let me finish with that.
Very briefly, if you don't mind.
That Pakistan is the immediate neighbor of Afghanistan. India is sitting far away. It is not an immediate neighbor. So that makes the hell of a difference. You cannot afford to completely deny the sacrifices denied to Pakistan. Pakistan can play a very, very important role in bringing peace to the region, but this is not the way of pitting one and beating the other. India should also look into the problem that it has created in Kashmir.
We'll go into more details about
the
way out of this crisis and what kind of influence Pakistan can bring to bring about a peaceful solution to this crisis. Despite the presence of US troops and American-trained Afghan forces, the Taliban has maintained its advance. In April last year, the group only controlled parts of the south central Ghor province. But since then, they've taken control of the northern city of Kunduz twice and the outskirts of Lashkargah in Helmand and the Tayawara area towards the south. Also extended their control over the northeastern provinces and overtaken Qala, giving them a majority of the Faryab province. Mr. Lang, we're talking about Taliban that is making significant military gains, particularly in the northern part, which was relatively quieter in the past. Amid those gains, is it going to be extremely late or difficult for the Americans to change that reality on the ground?
I mean, I think we have to be pretty clear going in about what we think the expectations are of what can be achieved by plussing up the number of troops, by what the battlefield commanders are asking for, 3,000 to 4,000, probably 4,000. I mean, I think what you can probably do is perhaps slow the momentum of the Taliban. I mean, what we've seen over the last 5 to 6 months, but particularly over the rise of this fighting season, is a significant advance by the Taliban, where they now control 50% of the country and, as you say, are active in the north in a way that they haven't been in the past. So additional troops going in to support the frontline effort of the Afghan soldiers, the Afghan army fighting, can probably assist in slowing that. The real question is whether or not it can turn the tide and have a significant impact on the sense of military momentum. And there, I think there are a number of questions to be answered.
And some of these questions that need to be answered, particularly by the Afghan government. And let me go to Mr. Shafiq Hamdan. Mr. Hamdan, the Afghan army and security forces have not been able to hold ground, restore stability in different parts of the country. There's rampant corruption, dissatisfaction with the political elite, ethnic divide, political divide in the country. Who can bring about a change to this reality? The Americans, the international community, or the Afghans themselves?
I believe this is the responsibility of the Afghan people and Afghan government, and we are determined to reform as well as changes at all levels. And meanwhile, as you have mentioned, I cannot ignore the fact that there is a lot of corruption, there is actually disputes, political dialogues going on every day between the government officials, and there is differences. But that's the beauty of democracy. Of course, we cannot stop debates about differences. When it comes to the ability of the Afghan National Security Forces, they have not been defeated in any fight, unless, unfortunately, in some cases, the entire team or the entire, small group of Afghan National Security Forces have been killed by the enemy. Other than that, they have not left their post and they have not been surrounded, except few cases. But what we need at this stage for countering insurgency, which is 3 stages, it's clearing, holding, and building. Of course, we are good in clearing, but when it comes to building and holding, there the Afghan National Security Forces need assistance. And therefore, we required assistance from the US and NATO forces.
And that's where lies the biggest problem facing the Afghan people. Let me go to Mr. Ayaz Wazir. Mr. Wazir, you served as an ambassador to your country in Afghanistan. You know what the Afghans say about your country, that you provide military assistance to the Haqqani network, that you are providing safe haven to the leadership of the Taliban, and that ultimately your biggest aim is to maintain Afghanistan as a pariah state or as a puppet state. How do you respond to those concerns?
I'm glad they didn't say that we provide the foot soldiers also. Let's not go into the accusation part of it. Pakistan has admitted, our former advisor to the Prime Minister has said it while he was on a visit to Washington, that the Taliban leadership is with us in Pakistan, but obviously that doesn't mean the foot soldiers are also with us. And we have said it time and again that we give every guarantee or assurance that the military support to them will not be given from here. That's why we want to completely fence the border, requesting the Afghan government to come and let's manage the border so that this thing goes from between of us, that we accuse them, people coming from you, or they accuse us that people are military help to Taliban is coming from you. But let's presume for a minute that Pakistan is giving military support. Then my question is that what the American forces are doing in Afghanistan when they have the capacity and capability of detecting a football-type object or even more than that on the ground, then why can't they hit these people or these ammunition supplies when it crosses into Afghanistan or even in the tribal area, which is the center of the American drone attacks?
I got your point.
So why or how can that?
Why aren't they able to detect those movements? Okay, I got pretty much your point. Mr. Lang, I would like to ask you this question basically, which is, if you put forward a strategy, you know that you're not going to be able to win it solely on the battlefield. You need also to win the hearts and minds of the Muslims and of the Afghan people. How can you achieve that when you are known for your bellicose rhetoric against foreigners, imposing a ban that is targeting Muslims?
Oh, so here you're referring to President Trump's
yes.
recent announcements about the... Oh, of course, I mean, I think all of that contributes to a very negative perception in the Muslim world with respect to the United States' intentions in the region. So, President Trump has done a pretty good job of reaching out to certain leaders in the Middle East, particularly those from authoritarian regimes, to develop a closer, warmer relationship than we saw perhaps under the Obama administration. The real question is whether or not he's doing the same thing with the population, whether or not he's winning their hearts and minds. And what, like limited polling we do have would suggest at this point that the messages he's sending through things like the ban on travel from certain Muslim countries, the rhetoric that he used during the campaign, really is doing a great deal to alienate those populations. So at the end of the day, I mean, I think you need to adjust that rhetoric in a pretty significant way if you're going to have some hope of holding on to the deeper relationships with the societies that are really going to matter over the long term. And here in Afghanistan, the one thing I would like to say, I'd like to pivot back to a point that was made about a diplomatic strategy. It is possible, obviously, to achieve some more on the battlefield by putting a couple thousand troops on the ground. The real question is how you tie that to a larger, more comprehensive strategy. And I know my Afghan colleague was quite enthusiastic about hearing the President speak about the politics, the economics, the assistance that's going to come. But this is all happening at a time when President Trump is eviscerating the State Department. So it's not clear to me where and how these resources are going to come from.
And also shutting down the very crucial Office of the Envoy for Afghanistan and Pakistan, which was very instrumental to paving the ground for a settlement. Mr. Hamdan, you're based in Afghanistan. I would like to ask you this question. 50% of the districts in Afghanistan are under the control of the Taliban. All world leaders, military commanders say there is absolutely no way to defeat the Taliban. Do you think that the only way out in the near future should be a genuine political settlement that brings about a solution where the Taliban, the government, and all the components of the society sit together?
I would like to clarify that all these 50 districts are not under the control of Taliban. There are areas where Taliban has their influence, but they do not control the entire district, which is a large area. Of course, when it comes to the settlement and solution, the military means are not the only means to settle the solution or resolve the problem in Afghanistan. It requires a political settlement, peace negotiation, and reconciliation. Of course, let me also mention about the role of Pakistan when it comes to peace and reconciliation. In the last at least 1 decade, the world community, Afghan government has tried to reach the insurgents or the Taliban through Pakistan for peace, settlement, and reconciliation. But Pakistan has played a devil game, and then every effort to reconcile with Taliban has been failed because of the Taliban, Pakistan's interference. And that's why the office for the special envoy for Afghanistan and Pakistan was not evaluated useful. Therefore, it was omitted. That was a good step. And now the approach of triangle, Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan will be more effective.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks to all our guests, Shafiq Hamdan, Ayaz Wazir, and Hardin Lang. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.